Kia ora everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, the first webinar for the year of the Aotearoa Property Data Network. There's just some more numbers building up, but we'll make a start. I will just run through the opening karakia. Te mata tātou. Whaia te mātauranga. Kia marama, kia tupu, kia tiaki, nā whenua, nā moana, nā arawai. Kia whai take, nā mahi katoa. Aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ia tātou, toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi tū te whenua, homie, hui, tai ki e. A little bit of housekeeping. First off, microphones and cameras can be turned on, and we encourage questions. There will be time after presentation today for Q&A, and you can either pop questions in the chat as they come to you, and I'll pick those up and voice them, or feel free to raise a hand and we can turn on the microphone. The webinar is being recorded. The recording has begun, and that will be shared afterwards with everyone who registered. So into the agenda. So we're just about to have some news and updates from LINZ, and then we'll have Anthony Randall, Senior BA at OpenPlan and the Wellington Underground Asset Register, giving us a demo and a run through of their latest functionalities. It'll be, this is I think the third time that the register's presented on the network, and we've fallen into a cadence of pretty much yearly updates, which is nice to see how that program's coming along. I do need to just provide some apologies for Jack Reinecke. So this was the second item on our agenda advertised, but unfortunately has fallen through today. We're not able to share the planned presentation about addressing information management system, but that will be we'll look out for that in a later webinar. So we'll just give a bit more time to Anthony today, to his demo. Maybe we don't have to rush through that as much as he maybe had anticipated, which will be good. I think we've got some surveyors on the call today, which you'll all be interested in that, and we'll give some time back at the end, so you'll get a bit of lunch hour back as well. So without much further ado, I will run through some news and updates first from LINZ. So firstly, to connected property data, our NZ Properties, the unit of property layer and a lot of associated tables has just been published out of pilot. So those are available for people to peruse at their leisure, and they are a combination of derived from DVR data and represent the best view of a boundary that we can provide across New Zealand, property boundary. On the NZ Property Hybrid, we ran a survey. You may have seen that recently in the last month or so, and we want to extend thanks to everyone who was able to take part in that. We received really excellent and detailed feedback, and we're just in the process of reviewing all of that. And we'll come back with some next steps in due course. But yeah, thanks again to everyone who was able to give us feedback through that survey. NZ Suburbs and Localities. So the change request panel met in April, and there were two changes reviewed. One was confirmed to Yaldhurst Hey. The boundary was adjusted there. And one major change was declined to Broadwood Mangamuka after a resident raised an issue. So one change and one pushback there to the Suburbs and Localities data set, and the next panel meeting will be in August. So if there's that's open to applications in the meantime. You may have seen already, we have a refreshed gazetteer from the New Zealand Geographic Board with improved accessibility and user experience. This is a screenshot here, and it's looking fantastic. So yeah, you can view that now at gazetteer.linz.govt.nz. And just on a general note, you may or may not be aware of, we've got a bit of a stable of newsletters growing now at LINZ. We have LandWrap, which is really focused at the Land Online audience, surveyors and solicitors interested in that land register, the Overseas Investment Pānui, and our latest Te Pokapū from the Māori Crown Relations team for our Māori and iwi partners and stakeholders. That's a new newsletter, just released its first issue in April. So if you want to browse all of our news and subscribe to any newsletters, then linz.govt.nz/news is the place to go. And that's it from LINZ. I'll just double check if there's any questions in the chat. Nope, that's all from me. So without much further ado, I will hand over to the main event of today. As I mentioned earlier, Anthony is a senior BA at Wellington Underground Asset Register and Open Plan. So he's going to be, I'll hand over the reins for that update on the register and a bit of a demo. Anthony.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Brent. Thank you very much for that, Ben. I'm just going to swap my screen over now, so fingers crossed this all works. Right.
Yep, I can see that.
Hopefully, if everything's worked, it looks exactly the way it did before. So
magic.
Thanks. Brilliant.
I'll just disappear.
Okay, thanks everyone for coming along. I'm conscious that some people may not have had the previous updates from our program before. So what I'll try and do is just go through it not too quickly, but hopefully not too slowly either. So I'm here to talk about the Underground Asset Register for Wellington. And this is a collaboration between a foundation called Digital Built Aotearoa, which is a public good trust. And what we're trying to do is just really work with the industry to see what we can do to basically improve our knowledge of the underground space. Right, excuse me a second. I'll just move on to the next slide. So yeah, what is the Wellington Underground Asset Register? Why are we building this? The reason we're doing this is we're well aware that we've got a lot of complexities and challenges around understanding underground assets, where they are, how to work with them, how to find them, and how to support people working in the sector. We've put quite a lot of attention into figuring out how we can make things better. And a lot of this is really involved around talking to people in the industry and building up the relationships to understand the problems they're facing. And like any kind of business domain, the more we dig into this, the more complexity we unearth. So the reason for why we're doing this, primarily it's around improving safety. It's trying to make life safer for people who work in the sector. It's trying to reduce disruption for people where there are strikes. It's trying to make design and planning easier. It's to try and help basically meet obligations under the code. And there was a very interesting case study done by the UK government who had a national underground asset register project. And they were looking at a conservative estimate of the benefits of a national approach to digitalising underground asset data calculates £30 worth of benefits for every £1 invested. And we believe that there's no reason to believe New Zealand is dissimilar to that. So there's a lot of value in doing this. The challenge is actually who does this and how does this get done? So what we're hoping to do, and just to kind of explain some of our thinking, the current state, we have a sort of a many-to-many relationship where you have designers and contractors and utilities and road controlling authorities are all interacting, sharing data, trying to get a complete picture of what's going on and try and understand what's happening. And this is quite complex, and it makes life quite hard. So there's quite a bit of friction and drag here. What we're hoping to move to is an environment where we can federate a lot of that information and put it into one place. So the data owners still own their data, but that data comes into a central area and is then shared out. And that includes utility asset data and contextual layers, all of which are things that are useful for designers and contractors and for people working in the field. Part of the reason for that is I've already spoken about the increased costs and disruption. So we're basically hoping to do what we can to make things better. And really to build a trusted view of what's going on. So yes, we'd like to build an underground asset register map, and we'd like to build the supporting tools and processes that make that useful for the sector and make life easier. And we went live last year, June, July, and we've sort of been rapidly developing from that. So what we have now is we've got a 24/7 easily accessible online map of Wellington's underground assets and some of the treasures. We've also made it possible for excavators who are working in the field to provide feedback to utility owners and to record hazards and observations for other map users. So this is a code obligation for basically anyone working in the underground space. It's actually quite hard to do at the moment, so we're hoping to make that a bit easier and a bit more robust. And this is also available on mobile devices, so you can capture those observations out in the field. You can also see what's around you, and you can capture those observations with the context of what's around you. And the 24-hour access is a huge thing if you're responding to an emergency or you're having to work ad hoc. So a really quick slide just to talk about who we are. So this is a project that's in collaboration with Wellington Council. Wellington Council, the driver here. Digital Built Aotearoa are a public good trust, and that's designed to effectively own the IP and help roll this out nationally. Wellington Council really isn't in a position that it can act nationally. It can start this and it can improve it, but to roll it out across the rest of the country, we need to have a suitable scope in which to grow. And we did a lot of research and decided that a public good trust is probably the ideal route for us. And to give you a little bit of perspective on where we've been and where we're going, we went live, as I said, last year in July. We've had a lot of work up till here with consultation and planning to try and understand what we're building and why, and the justification. What we've been doing over the past year is we've been working on improving the software, the processes, the data that we have in place, and the policy around it. Moving on, so the idea is then to have a managed transition from Wellington Council over to a national rollout, and we're still basically finalising the precise structure of how that looks and how that works, but we're hoping to move to a point that we can start working with other local authorities and we can extend this around the country, because there are some challenges with growing nationally, but it also gives us opportunities to start solving more problems. So yeah, I think we've made some really good progress in the last year. In Wellington, we've got 3 waters data, we've got gas and electricity, we've got telecoms, fuel. We also have protected survey marks, which are in there as a sort of a reference layer. They're also something that needs to be protected, so that's quite useful to have in there. We work with a technical reference group within Wellington, which are a number of industry sector users. So that covers utilities and contractors and designers and surveyors and the corridor managers. And they've given some really good steers on what we work on and what we focus. Another thing that's really pleasing is we're able to work with the Wellington Region Emergency Management Office. So we've been able to give them access to the tool in an emergency situation. And we're continuing to work. We've got a lot of things coming that are planned, and I'm quite excited about some of the changes that we'll be adding into the platform. So I'd like to spend the bulk of my time really just giving you a demo of the application so you can see what this looks like. And the reason for that is I find it a bit more useful to just show what's going on. So excuse me, I'll just go back a bit and see if, right. Ben, can you see the map on the screen, please?
Yes.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so I've actually come in and I'm in what we call our layers view. Now, first off, this is not designed as a traditional GIS map. I come from a GIS background, so my bias is to having all the bells and whistles. A lot of the people we're working with, they don't regularly use web GIS or web maps or mapping tools. So we've deliberately designed this to be as simple as we can make it, to try and make it easy to use and straightforward. And that's involved quite a lot of sort of custom application development. But the intention is to make this easy to use. So what we can see on the map is we can see the publicly visible utility assets, and we can also see survey marks, and we can also see site records. And these are basically observations that have been submitted from users from what they've found. So for the publicly accessible data, we've got the 3 waters, and we've got gas as well. This is not complete for gas. This is PowerCo's gas data. We don't have Nova Energy's gas data on the public view because they've asked us not to make that public. This brings me on to the next bit. So the primary way of interacting with the map is if you have a project, is you go in and you draw a query, which is effectively a project boundary or an area of interest which shows where you're working. And what I'm doing here is I'm just drawing a polygon to suggest, you know, if I'm looking at a bit of Featherston Street and Panama Street, this will go away and query the database. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more so that's a bit clearer. And this comes back with all the data sets in this. So this has now got telecoms, it's got the complete gas data, and it's also got electric as well. You'll see that there's a few nodes showing on there as dots. And you'll also see that I can interact with the map, so I can hover over things and it highlights and it brings up a little tooltip. That tooltip data is not as rich as we'd like it to be, so we're working on a bit more work around the data model and how we display that to make that more useful. But what's really powerful, straight up as we can see that we've got some strategic assets here. And those are assets that the utility providers have advised us have got special working conditions around them. Now I'm just going to swap my base map here to aerial imagery because that makes it a little bit more visible. We have the option here to go in and sort of highlight the strategic assets. And so what this does is it hides the non-strategic assets and emphasizes the strategic assets. The other assets are still there, they've just got an increased transparency. I'm just going to dismiss that toaster and I'll go back to the main view. But one of the things I find really exciting about this is the ability to interact with the map and see what's going on. So what I've done here is I've actually just clicked on the map and that's returned a point query that shows me what's present in those areas. And you can see there's quite a lot of Wellington Electric data here. And this is how they've mapped their data. But there are a couple of assets that are marked as strategic. So there's a supervisory cable and there's a medium voltage cable. The supervisory cable supports telemetry that hooks into protection circuits. So that's definitely something that we don't want to see broken. Medium voltage cables are things that are 11 kV to 33 kV. So these are things that will be quite heavily protected, but they're very sensitive around how you work around it. And that lets us, so what I've done here is I've just clicked on the data set and this lets us drill in. So this then actually gives us the ability to share working conditions around the assets. That's in there as a link at the moment. We could make that a little bit more sensitive to have a bit more information, but we can actually drill into this to find out a bit of information about what's there and what it means, and how we can actually rely on this data. It's a little bit longer than I'd like to have, because there's quite a bit to read there. But this is one of the challenges with the data, is there's quite complicated messaging around explaining what's going on there. So if I pop back to the assets selected, the other thing that I find really powerful is it highlights the assets on the map as you move over them. So you'll see that it's actually emphasizing what's there. So we have the scope to put a little bit more information around the assets. Oh, and I neglected to mention, so we've got operational status and criticality showing on there, as well as where the asset comes from. Later on, we're hoping to extend that with things that are specific to the asset, so things like material and diameter, if there are invert depths that are known for chamber locations, anything that makes it a bit easier to work in the field and understand what you're interacting with. Now, because this is a map view, we can actually go in and say, right, I don't want to see everything because that's a little bit overwhelming. So at the moment, this is showing just the survey marks, but I can go in and I can start turning on the assets that I'm interested in having a look at. And I can just selectively have a look at some elements of it. So this gives me the ability to really try and help with the fact that having all this information on the map can be quite overloading. So again, it's just trying to strike the balance between giving people all the information, but also trying to manage the complexity of having all that jump out at you at once. So yeah, so that's the area of interest view. We've got a little bit more functionality coming on from this. So the intention from this area of interest is this is basically your project view. From here, you'll be able to then notify the utility owners and the corridor manager that you're intending on working in the space, and that gives you the ability to then ask about services such as mark out and locate, and also around standover. If you do your design work and find that you actually do need to work near a critical asset, you can contact the utility and just find out how that happens. And Kurt, thanks for your question on the accuracy of the data. The accuracy of the data is as good as we can get from the providers, and that will vary. It will vary quite a bit across the data set. Some of the data out in the suburbs, especially for some of the areas, we know that if it's older data, it may not be particularly accurate. It may actually be logical data, which shows that it runs down a street, but doesn't show what side of the road it runs on. We'd like to be able to give an estimate to say how accurate we think this is. I think in practice, most of this is plus or minus 1 meter. And we're also working on ways that we can assess the accuracy based on what people encounter in the field, to provide some feedback on that. Reveal did some excellent work surveying across the city, and they had some really interesting insights on how accurate the data is. But with all of this data, these are all desk records. So if anyone's working in the field with this data, you still need to follow all the usual code provisions. You need to pothole, you need to inspect, you need to take as many safety precautions as you can. This will give you an indication of what might be there, but there's no guarantee that this is accurate. And this, again, is part of the complex messaging that we're trying to build a tool to make this better. We also know that there are challenges around the accuracy of the data, and that's partly why we're doing this. So again, the feedback mechanism is really important. To give you an idea of what that feedback mechanism looks like, I've got a site record. So this is one we were working with a contracting utility, JVC. Okay, and I'll come back to your question in a little sec. So this is where JVC were doing some potholing data to investigate what was there. And for this, it's a little bit easier if I swap to the aerial imagery. What happened is effectively there was a service strike on a potable water feed. And what we found is that potable water feed was encased in the protective concrete layer. So normally the assets are routed underneath the reinforced concrete. In this case, there's a stormwater drain that runs underneath, so there wasn't space, so the potable water runs through. Now, this is actually after the repair. The repair is still in the reinforced concrete layer, so that's been covered up. But what we've done is we've captured the location of this, and you can see that there's a drain going across here and there's decorative tiling. So we've got a rough indication of where this is. This has been placed by basically manual eyeballing on the map. But what this means is the next contractor that comes along who's working in this area gets a point that they can look at that explains where this is. So this is something that basically helps you identify a potential hazard or a challenge for your project when you're working in the area. And this is something we will be working on tagging this and making it possible to filter the maps so you can see ones that have been resolved and ones that are still outstanding. So Anna, just to answer your question, how is this tool different from GIS? So this is effectively, it is a GIS platform. It's a simplified web map. We get our data from the data providers, and we basically do an extract, transform, load to turn it into a slightly simpler data format, so we can load it in. So it means that our assets are consistent, relatively consistent across the classes. And then we basically refresh that. Depending on the organization, that's typically on a monthly or fortnightly cycle, and we update that. At the moment, that's being worked through with the organizations, but basically as they update their asset records and as-builts come in and change the network and repairs are made, that should come through and be reflected in the platform. Anselm, thank you for the standard on specifying the location of the assets. That's a really good point to raise. This should show what this looks like on a mobile device. And I'm just going to change the look and feel of the screen so it looks like a mobile device. Yeah, Mark, I'll come back to your question a little bit. This is what it looks like if you're on a mobile device. It's a slightly simpler look and feel because you've got less space to move around, and we've moved to a sort of vertical orientation rather than the left-hand panel orientation. So I've just navigated to my direction in here. This is quite cool because then this lets us say, okay, tell me what assets are around me. And this does a 50-meter circular buffer, which shows the assets that are around my location. So this is something that's available to field workers who can go out and immediately find what's around them, and they get a rough idea of what's going on. Now, this is device GPS location. That's always got location challenges. You can improve that a little bit by turning on the world imagery and having a look at what else is around you. Also, if you're aware where the LINZ survey marks are, they can help you, as well as the placement of the streets. But the functionality that we're really keen on is the ability to go in and create a site record. And this may answer some of the questions around just how this is placed on the map. So the first thing we're asking people to do is we're asking them to place a pin on a map, and the aerial imagery for here is not quite reflective of where we are, but this say is roughly where I think the asset is. It's giving me a playback on the coordinates in standard sort of 4326 spatial reference, and this lets me put in a description of the record. I can capture images using the phone on my device, or I can take images that are in my gallery and upload them. I can put in the date of it. And if I think there's something that I need to flag that's either wrongly recorded or unknown, is I can capture a bit of information. And this goes off and creates the record. This is deliberately very simple and very quick. A lot of the contractors we spoke with, they're on time and materials contracts. They don't have a lot of time to do this. So there was a lot of pushback about doing anything too involved. So we've made this fairly simple initially. And the idea is the more information we get coming through, the better this is to really start bringing that feedback through. And to give you a bit of perspective of why this is great for a contractor, is for a contractor working in Wellington, there may be, say, 13 different utilities that they're interacting with. And if they open up the ground and find something that's wrong, under the permission to dig, they need to close that up by 4 o'clock. but they need to phone around 12 or 13 different organizations and say, hey, we've found something. Is this of interest to you? Do you know anything about it? And that's really, really hard to do. Here, they put it on the map, they do it once, that then lets the corridor manager know that something's going on, and we can then liaise with the utilities and make sure that they get this feedback coming through. So it's great for the corridor manager, it's great for the utilities, and it's a big time saving for the contractor. Now I'm just going to cancel that because this is actually in the live environment, and I'm going to go back to the full screen view. So yeah, so this is what I plan to show you for the view of the application. I will just go back to the PowerPoint presentation. Right, sorry, I'll just take a few of these questions. So Mark, your question around the national rollout being post-July 2025, we're still targeting that. We have spoken to some of the territorial authorities. We are in a position where we're really going to have to focus on who we talk to first. So we're sort of starting with small steps and just trying to work further. So we are working on a national rollout, but it will probably be territorial authority at a time, because we then need to engage the utilities and the contracts in the areas. And there's quite a lot of work to just bring people on board. Kurt, we don't have offline capability for this. This would be great to have offline capability. However, that's quite a challenging piece. At the moment, we are relying on mobile data, and the service is running on cloud infrastructure. So it means that so long as the cellular network is up, then things should be running. If the cellular network is not running, then yes, that is a challenge, and that's something that we are looking at in the future. Paul, your question about how does this flow into operational planning? Part of the workflow around the area of interest, we haven't built in an export function yet. We need to engage with all of the data providers and make sure that they're comfortable with sharing the data. The reason we use that query tool on area of interest is that's rate limited. So that gives the data providers some assurance that people aren't going to try and view all of their data across Wellington, and that satisfies some of the competitive concerns there. Ultimately, we would like people to be able to extract information and take it into their own system. So either API or some feed that gives them an export. So then if you're a designer, you can load that in, you can put that through your processing, and that lets you design using this data. I hope that answers your question. I'll just quickly skip through the slides to get back to where we were. And if there are more questions, please keep them coming. And apologies for running through this again. So really just to talk through some of the lessons we've learned is that this is actually quite a complex beast. And my background is data and GIS, but a lot of what we've done has been really working with the sector to understand what they need, to understand the data that's out there and to understand the challenges, but also to understand what's useful and how to make this work. And again, it is very much, we're taking small steps to start with, and we're hoping to sort of incrementally build and keep making things better. It's been fantastic working with the sector. The people we're working with, they're all really interested in making things better. We've had a number of people give up quite a lot of their time to help us with feedback and with understanding what's going on and to show us how their systems work. So that's really sort of helped us build a richer understanding of this. And I think, you know, the takeaway for me is that there's so much scope for innovation here to make it easier to share information. A lot of this information is siloed. A lot of organizations have their own asset data available for third-party contractors to work on subcontracts for them. But it's very difficult to get this into one place and see that. And the power of having everything on a map, even if that data is not perfect, is a game changer. It really makes things, makes a big step. when I talked earlier about the complex messaging, there's a lot of challenges around getting the content right to explain to people how to use this and how to approach the platform. We would like at some point to go public, but for now it's designed as a sector tool, so it's being used by industry users. But we're still very, very strong on the messaging that you still need to use all the usual tools. And a number of the data providers we work with, they've got a really good relationship with Before You Dig. Before You Dig provides an excellent service. So in many cases, people are also going through and they're doing they're checking this with Before You Dig as well. So that really gives you a couple of things to look at. This kind of gives you a nice interactive view to understand what's going on. And you've also got Before You Dig to look at. And this wouldn't be a data talk without a map. So this is one where we can have a look at some of the query distribution. This actually comes from our test environment, but this kind of shows what you'd expect to see. It sees a lot of the queries distributed around the central city. And this is information that we can then share with the corridor manager to show them what's going on, and also with the utilities to show what sort of interest. To me, it's really interesting. And I think as we dive into this more and we get more feedback coming through and we get more functionality, there'll be a lot more scope to sort of add to this, and we'll get more richer data feedback coming back. So that really concludes what I have for the slides. So I'd like to say thank you very much for your attention. And are there any questions that I haven't answered?
Thank you very much, Anthony. That was excellent, and you did an incredible job answering the questions that you could on the fly. So yeah, as Anthony mentioned, and as I mentioned earlier, there'll be Q&A time allowed after the presentation. So I'm just trying to see if there weren't. I think there was one unanswered from Kurt. Is there online, offline capability coming? Especially for DR requirements or when comms are sketchy. And Anthony, I think your camera turned off when we had that glitch earlier. So if you want to turn it back on, feel free.
Awesome, thanks, Ben. Yeah, that's a great question, Kurt. We would love to do offline capability, and that's something that there are ways we can approach it. That's probably further down the roadmap for us because it's quite complex to solve. But there are ways of doing this, and there's a number of products out there that will sort of download an area where you might be working, and that's great in rural areas. So far at the moment, we've sort of focused really much more on the urban centres, and we're relying on having mobile views. But one of the other things we're working on is having print views. So if you're working in a project area, you can download the print views, you can print them out, put them in a binder and take them with you. And that also gives you, again, the ability to have print views dedicated to each utility and a combined one. Yeah, and Paul, that's a great point about the scaling across the country. Scaling is a huge challenge. There's a lot of work to do here. We're really excited about it because, again, everyone we work with, we learn more. All of the data models are different, and that lets us build up just a more complete picture of what we don't know. And I hasten to say that the more I learn here, the more I realize I don't know about the product. But yeah, thank you very much for your time, people.
Anthony, Mark Coburn asked a bit earlier on about the rollout, national rollout, and one of the slides mentioning July 2025.
Yeah,
is that still accurate?
That is still accurate, Mark. So we are targeting the territorial authorities, and again, that really is, we are talking to them now. We're still sort of finalising how the transfer and the transition between Wellington Council and Digital Built Aotearoa works. Part of the way this works is this will be funded through corridor access fees is the intention. We're trying to set those fees at a level that lets us continue to develop the platform, but also it's not a barrier to councils coming on. and that's likely to be based on the capita size of the councils, so smaller councils get involved. And Jeff, that's a great point about Minister Bishop's recommendation. We've spoken to the Minister about that, and they're also looking internally as to what this project means nationally. That a lot of this stuff, the politics is above my pay grade, so I can't comment too much on that.
I think the program was one of the applicants for the Te Waihanga's Infrastructure Commission's Infrastructure Priorities Program in December, and I think have they released their priorities yet? Have you heard back from them on that? How they've assessed the program?
I think that's still being assessed. I think that's coming out later in the month, and again, that's part of the challenges with sorting out how the transition works. And we're hoping to, as we roll out nationally, as we've had a really strong sector group in Wellington, we're hoping to have a sector group nationally that basically lets us deal with things outside of Wellington much more effectively.
You mentioned up the top about the 30-to-1 return on investment that they've seen in the UK, and I think we can all agree with you, and it kind of speaks for itself for how many sort of unknowns and stakeholders involved and the complexity. There's obviously massive return out there to realise on this investment. Has there been, and obviously that will also scale up as it rolls out nationally, but has there been any sort of early studies to see sort of what is just being, what's being realised just within Wellington in terms of a return?
So in terms of the return for us just yet, it's early days. We did a study in the middle of last year, which basically suggested that there was a significant impact in Wellington from being challenges with finding things and with service strikes. I don't have the figures off the top of my head, but it was a significant figure. That business case for the rate of return, that's quite challenging because a lot of that cost is it's not spread evenly, and it's quite hard to see sometimes. Quite often that may be a contractor bids on a project, they go out and they do a bit of work, they do some potholing, and they find that actually the situation underground is not what they expect. So they go back to the designers, they need to redesign, they need to reroute their project, they need to then go and re-pothole and replan. And so something that was planned as a 3-month project may wind up being a 6-month project with all the sort of resulting disruption for other people commuting and transport and other businesses in the area, as well as the designers. And so that's partly why there's this appetite to get things better. And this is hopefully one way that gives us a bit more scope to kind of address that.
Fantastic. And is the tool being put to I guess a big acid test now with the Golden Mile work that's kicked off? I guess that's a big hairy project to throw something like this at.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So one of the great things about working with Wellington Council is Wellington Council, as the corridor manager, has got the ability to basically influence how people approach projects in the city, and can put conditions on basically how contractors and designers work. So part of what we've been doing has been asking people to give us feedback on what they're doing and on their potholing activity, and also where they're supplying the as-builts. So again, as we get further into the program, we get a bit more scope to kind of improve that. And we're hoping that as we work with other territorial authorities, we can learn from best practice, and we can try and also sort of share a bit of that around. And I think that a lot of the information that we'll capture will be really, really welcomely received by the sort of the transport managers, so they can then know who's working where in the city and what's going on. So it kind of ties in with forward works planning and with the corridor access requests. It just gives them a more complete picture.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thanks a lot, Anthony, for your time and for your fantastic presentation, and for answering all the many questions we've thrown at you. I'll just take the reins again to share some closing remarks. And I'll share my screen. Sorry, bear with me. So yeah, just to as I move to close, I am reminding you about we've got a short series of webinars going on at the moment, and 3 webinars, one every 2 weeks. So the next one in our lineup is on Wednesday, the 4th of June, and we'll have the Natural Hazards Commission and urban intelligence, talking to how natural hazards intersect with property, and sharing some intelligence portals that each of them have built to help with that. I've just popped the link in the chat if people would like to go and check that out and register for that. Otherwise, the geospatial industry survey is ongoing until the 30th of June, and this would really it would really help to get as much feedback as possible, obviously, to get a representative view from across the survey, from across the industry, of how your working lives are going. So again, I've popped the link in the chat for that, and so yeah, do feel free to just open that, hit those links before the meeting closes, and you lose access to the chat. And then yeah, otherwise I will just close with the karakia. Tamata tātou, kua e te kaupapa, ka rea ngā hua, ka rere ngā arawai. Kua mau te mātauranga, he arahina ngā mahi o toitu te whenua, kia tau te rangimari e, ki runga i a tātou katoa. Homi e, hui e, tai ki e. Thank you again, Anthony, and thank you everyone for your time dialing in today. We've been able to give you a bit of time back, and yes, hopefully we'll see you at a future webinar. Thanks all.